Hi ESS folks, it's Miss Lenorvitz, and this is going to be the second installment of how to put together your carbon cycle model. So at this point, your carbon cycle model should be labeled with the spheres, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, the biosphere, and the geosphere. You should have put in place the major reservoirs where carbon is found, the crust, the soils, fossil fuels, oceans, the atmosphere, and plants. And then you should have multiple representations of the different forms carbon takes in each of those reservoirs. What you're going to be adding next is the rate at which carbon moves from one place to another. And we're going to call those steps processes. So carbon can move from one reservoir to another through a process. And some of those processes are fast, which we'll represent in green, and some of them are slow, which we're going to represent using the color orange. So what do we mean by fast carbon and slow carbon? Probably a little bit different than what you think about somebody who is fast or who is slow, or a car that is fast or slow. When we think about the carbon cycle, a fast process in the carbon cycle is something that moves carbon in less than 100 years. And when we think about slow carbon, we're thinking about a process that moves carbon on a really slow time frame, more than 100 years. So for context, think about geologic time here. So something that happens in less than 100 years is pretty fast. Something that takes longer than that, a little bit slower. Some of the processes may even take several millions of years. So how are you going to go about doing this? How do you add in these processes? Well, you're going to be using a handout that will look like this. So on your handout, on the left-hand side, you're going to see that column labeled as processes that move carbon. I recognize that when you get this handout, it is not going to be in color, but the top several entries here that are shown in green on the screen are going to be represented by green arrows. These are all processes that move carbon quickly. They are fast carbon processes. The orange arrows that you're going to add into your chart, which include the remaining items on this process list, are slow carbon processes. They're ones that take longer than 100 years to occur. Well, so how are you going to figure out where to represent these arrows? Again, a process is something that moves carbon from one reservoir to another. Here you're going to need to do a little bit of close reading of the explanation. So we'll start off and look at the one at the very top. So here, one of the fast processes for carbon is burning. I've zoomed that in so that we can look at it a little more carefully here. We're going to be representing this with a green arrow because it's a fast process in our model. So burning, which is also known as combustion, the explanation for that is carbon that's stored as carbohydrates, whether that's in wood or in plants, or stored as hydrocarbon in fossil fuels, are released as carbon in the form of carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere. All right, well, there are a couple of pieces that you're going to need to know there. One is its starting spot. So burning can have two starting spots. It could be burning of carbohydrates in wood and in plants, and it could be burning of hydrocarbons in fossil fuels. Its finishing place in this part of the carbon cycle is going to be as carbon dioxide gas in the atmosphere. So how will you represent this in your model? You are going to start at the starting spot. So one of our starting spots for this is wood and plants. And if that wood is burned, it's going to release carbon dioxide gas to the atmosphere. So using green, because this is a fast carbon process, I've drawn an arrow here from the plants to the carbon dioxide represented in the atmosphere. And I've gone ahead and I've labeled that process burning. So I'm going to label right along the stem of my arrow. Now, I haven't shown all of the places on the carbon cycle where burning can take carbon that's in hydrocarbons and emit it as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but I would do that in my finished model. So I would have another arrow that's green in color that's going to point from my fossil fuels to the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and I would also label that one burning. So what is this going to start to look like as you continue to work on it? Every arrow should have a color that represents whether it's fast in green or slow carbon process in orange. And it should be labeled with the name of the process. And I'm going to read the explanation in order to figure out the starting spot and the ending spot for the carbon in that cycle. So your diagram is going to start to have a lot more information on it than it does already. I know it's quite busy here. I have not labeled the processes that are represented here, but go ahead and pause the video and see if you can identify what some of these particular arrows are representing. Did you pause the video? Have you given it some thought? Well, there are quite a few things that we're representing here that represent photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is when plants or other photosynthetic organisms take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bring that in, and through a series of very complex metabolic reactions, along with water and along with sunlight, can process that to turn it into sugars and oxygen. So I'm representing here with this arrow, with this one here going to the carrots, with this one here going to the grasses and to the trees. All of those are representing photosynthesis. So those are fast processes. So my next step would be to go in and put a label on each one of the tails of those arrows, representing that as photosynthesis. You'll notice that I've started to represent some other fast carbon processes, originating in this case from the cells in the organism of our cow here, and also originating from our fish that's in the ocean here. You'll also notice that I've included a fast process here between phytoplankton and fish. I haven't yet labeled those, so this is an in-process diagram, but yours is going to start to look something like this. It's a good strategy to try to not have your arrows cross each other, because visually that becomes challenging for you, who's ultimately going to use this model, to figure out where that arrow is starting and where it's ending. So hopefully that gives you a good start on how to add those processes, whether they are fast or slow, into your carbon cycle.